In the spring of 2006, Italian investigators were listening to a phone call between a senior Juventus executive and a man who had no business being in that conversation at all. The man on the other end of the line wasn't a player, wasn't a coach, wasn't an agent. He was a referee designator, the person who decided which officials would control Serie A matches, and he was taking requests. That phone call, one of hundreds intercepted by Italian police, would detonate the most catastrophic corruption scandal in the history of European football. It would end with Italy's most decorated club stripped of its titles, thrown out of the top division, and exposed as the center of a referee fixing operation so brazen, so methodical, and so deeply embedded in the sport that even the investigators couldn't believe what they were hearing. This is Calciopoli, and it didn't start with a scandal. It started with a phone. To understand Calciopoli, you first need to understand what Juventus meant to Italian football in the early 2000s. Founded in Turin in 1897, Juventus wasn't just a football club, it was a dynasty. Owned by the Agnelli family, the same family that built Fiat and shaped modern Italy, the club had won more Italian league titles than any other team in history. By 2005, they had collected 28 Serie A championships. They were Serie A. And at the heart of Juventus's football operation sat Luciano Moggi. Moggi was the club's general director. Short, stocky, with a thick Tuscan accent and a reputation that preceded him everywhere he went, Moggi was not a man who dealt in subtleties. He had spent decades in Italian football, at Napoli, at Roma, at Torino, and he had learned, somewhere along the way, that winning required more than just good players. It required control. By 2006, Moggi had built a network inside Italian football that was extraordinary in its reach. He had relationships with agents, club executives, television broadcasters, journalists, and, crucially, officials inside the Italian Football Federation, known as the FIGC. But it was his relationship with a man named Paolo Bergamo that would bring everything down. Bergamo was the co-head of the referee designating body, the department inside the FIGC responsible for assigning referees to matches. He held the keys to the most important hidden variable in football: which official would walk out onto the pitch on Saturday afternoon. And he was on the phone with Luciano Moggi regularly.
The Italian Football Federation in Rome has been raided by police.
Italian football will never be the same again.
In 2004, Neapolitan prosecutors launched an investigation into alleged corruption in Italian football. The immediate trigger wasn't a Juventus match. It was a Fiorentina match, a suspicious result, a tip-off. They began tapping phones. What they found was not what they expected. The wiretaps didn't reveal a single corrupt transaction, a single bribe, a single envelope of cash changing hands. What they revealed was something far more systematic, a web of constant communication between club officials, referee designators, and football federation insiders, all feeding each other information, trading favors, and shaping outcomes long before the whistle blew. The phone calls that emerged ran into the hundreds. Moggi was at the center of nearly all of them. In one call, Moggi and Bergamo discuss upcoming fixtures and which referees are most suitable for specific matches. In another, Moggi expresses irritation with a referee who hadn't performed well in a previous Juventus game, and the designator takes note. In others, Moggi is heard talking to referees directly, praising their performances, or, when displeased, applying pressure in language that left little to interpretation. The investigators were building a case, but they had no idea how far up it went. What Calciopoli ultimately revealed wasn't a simple match-fixing scheme. It was something more sophisticated and arguably more damaging. Moggi wasn't asking referees to hand Juventus specific results. He was shaping the environment in which results were produced. Here's how it worked. Before each match day, Paolo Bergamo and his co-designator Pierluigi Pareto would compile a list of potential referees for upcoming matches. In a legitimate system, this process is meant to be random and transparent. Officials are rotated, rest periods observed, conflict of interest protocols followed. But the wiretaps showed that Bergamo in particular was consulting with Moggi and other club officials before finalizing assignments. Referees who had shown a tendency to make decisions favorable to certain clubs or unfavorable to their rivals were flagged, discussed, and moved accordingly. The effect was cumulative and insidious. Over an entire season, across dozens of matches, the aggregate of even marginally favorable officiating could be worth multiple points. And multiple points in Serie A was often the difference between the title and second place. It was, in the words of one Italian journalist who covered the scandal extensively, not match fixing, it was season fixing.
Yesterday, the entire board of top club Juventus resigned.
Claims of match fixing against Juventus, AC Milan, Lazio and Fiorentina.
And it had been going on for years. One of the most important things to understand about Calciopoli is what the investigators found when they looked beyond Juventus. AC Milan was also implicated. Specifically, Fausto Pari, a figure connected to Milan's ownership structure, was identified in the wiretaps as having his own communication lines with referee designators. The extent of Milan's involvement became one of the most bitterly contested aspects of the entire affair and continues to generate controversy to this day. Fiorentina and Lazio were also drawn into the scandal. Club officials at both teams were found to have engaged in similar, if less extensive, conversations with designation officials. The implication was uncomfortable. This wasn't a single club abusing a clean system. The system itself had been compromised at multiple points. But the evidence against Juventus was qualitatively and quantitatively different from anything else in the investigation. The volume of Moggi's calls, the directness of his interventions, the sheer regularity with which referee choices appeared to track his preferences. All of it pointed to an operation that was not occasional or opportunistic, but structural and deliberate. Juventus was the hub. Everyone else was a spoke.
Officials uncovered evidence that some of the top people in Italian football were putting pressure on referees.
The investigation started after their general manager, Luciano Moggi, had his phone tapped and he was taped discussing refereeing appointments with Italian football officials.
In May 2006, with Italy preparing for the World Cup in Germany, the story broke. The Italian newspaper La Repubblica published a series of articles detailing the wiretap contents. The transcripts were damning, the names were recognizable, the implications were enormous. Italian football went into crisis overnight. Moggi resigned from Juventus within days. So did his co-director Antonio Giraudo. The FIGC launched its own internal investigation, separate from the criminal proceedings, to determine what sporting penalties should apply. The hearings that followed were chaotic, deeply politicized, and bitterly contested. Lawyers argued about the admissibility of the wiretaps. Club officials disputed interpretations of the calls. The question of how many clubs were involved, and to what degree, became a battle fought as much in the press as in the hearing rooms. But the sporting tribunal had to act. The World Cup was about to start, and Italy's reputation was on the line. In July 2006, the FIGC handed down its verdicts. The penalties were unprecedented in the history of Italian football. Juventus was found guilty of the most serious charges. The club was stripped of their 2004 to 2005 and 2005 to 2006 Serie A titles, both of which were vacated entirely rather than awarded to the second-place finisher. They were relegated to Serie B, the second division, with a 9-point deduction to begin the following season. It was a punishment so severe that many in Italian football struggled to believe it was real. Moggi received a lifetime ban from all football-related activities in Italy. Bergamo and Pareto, the referee designators, were banned from the sport entirely. AC Milan, Fiorentina, and Lazio were all found guilty of lesser but still significant offenses. Milan were relegated to Serie B alongside Juventus, but subsequently had their penalty reduced on appeal, ultimately remaining in Serie A with a points deduction. Fiorentina and Lazio also received points penalties and initial relegation sentences that were reduced on appeal. The discrepancy between Juventus's sentence and those of the other clubs became a source of lasting grievance, not among Juventus supporters who felt they had been singled out, but among their rivals, who argued that Milan in particular had escaped with punishment disproportionate to the evidence against them. That argument has never been fully resolved.
It's a plot against Juventus, says this one, because we've won too much. It's a conspiracy. Other clubs have had problems and yet nothing's happened to them.
In a twist that felt almost too cinematic to be real, Italy won the 2006 World Cup in Germany, while the Calciopoli scandal was still playing out at home. The squad featured players from all the implicated clubs, including Gianluigi Buffon, Fabio Cannavaro, and Alessandro Del Piero from Juventus, and Andriy Shevchenko and Kaká from Milan. Italy beat France on penalties in Berlin. The country erupted. The timing created a profound dissonance. Italy was simultaneously celebrating its greatest sporting triumph and confronting the exposure of industrial-scale corruption at the heart of its national sport. Some argued the World Cup victory helped Italian football absorb the shock of Calciopoli, that the national celebration gave the country somewhere to direct its emotions. Others felt it obscured accountability, that the jubilation made it easier to move on before justice had been fully served. Cannavaro, captain of the World Cup winning side, had won the Ballon d'Or, the world's best player award, in a year when questions about how Italian league titles had been won were still very much open. Football, as always, found a way to hold contradictions without resolving them. For Juventus, the 2006-07 season was unlike anything the club had experienced in living memory. Relegated with a 9-point deduction, they began the season in Serie B, playing against clubs from smaller Italian cities in smaller stadiums, with crowds that bore no resemblance to the packed Delle Alpi of previous years. The club hemorrhaged talent immediately. Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Patrick Vieira, Fabio Cannavaro, and Lilian Thuram all left. The wage bill was slashed. The European competitions that had defined the club's recent history were gone. But Juventus did something that surprised many observers. They stayed together in the ways that mattered. Del Piero, despite lucrative offers from across Europe, stayed. Buffon stayed. Pavel Nedved stayed. Together, they drove Juventus through a season that felt more like a punishment tour than a football campaign, winning promotion back to Serie A at the first attempt, and doing it comfortably, without the 9-point hole ever becoming insurmountable. Their return to Serie A in 2007 was not triumphant exactly, but it was defiant. Calciopoli did not end with the verdicts of July 2006. In many ways, it has never ended. The criminal prosecutions that ran parallel to the sporting hearings produced convictions, appeals, further appeals, and eventually, in the way of Italian legal proceedings, outcomes that satisfied almost no one. Moggi was convicted of sporting fraud in the criminal courts and received a suspended sentence. He continued for years to insist that he had been unfairly targeted, that the phone calls, taken out of context, misrepresented the reality of how Italian football operated at the time, and that other clubs, particularly Milan, had engaged in identical practices without facing comparable consequences.
We expected a balanced sentence from a court comprised of jurists of such esteem. Evidently, our expectations were misplaced.
The question of whether Moggi was right, not about his innocence, but about the selectivity of the punishment, has never been definitively answered. A 2011 investigation found evidence of additional wiretaps involving AC Milan officials that had reportedly not been included in the original Calciopoli proceedings. The implications, if proven, would have suggested that the prosecutorial focus had been uneven at best. Those findings were contested. The legal and sporting cases multiplied. By the 2000s, the full legal apparatus of Calciopoli had produced an outcome that looked less like justice and more like an unfinished argument. The titles stripped from Juventus were never awarded to anyone. They remain officially vacant, a ghost on the record books. Step back from the phone calls and the penalties in the courtrooms for a moment and ask a simpler question. What did Calciopoli actually reveal about football? The honest answer is uncomfortable. It revealed that the line between influence and corruption in elite sport is drawn not by law or regulation, but by the tolerance of the institutions involved. Moggi's behavior was not invented from nothing. He operated within a culture of informal power that had existed in Italian football for decades, a culture where relationships with officials, federation insiders, and media figures were considered part of the competitive landscape, not a violation of it. What Calciopoli did was expose that culture to daylight. The phone calls that brought Moggi down were not different in kind from conversations happening elsewhere in Italian football. They were different in volume, in ambition, and in the thoroughness with which Moggi pursued his advantage. He played the game better than anyone else, and the game, it turned out, was rigged. Football responded to Calciopoli by strengthening referee assignment procedures, tightening communication protocols, and establishing clearer prohibitions on contact between club officials and officiating bodies. Those reforms were real and meaningful. But the deeper culture that produced Calciopoli, the assumption that power could be exercised informally, that relationships were currency, that the rules existed for those who couldn't find a way around them, that culture is not fixed by a regulation. It runs through institutions. It runs through people. It requires something harder to manufacture than a rule. Luciano Moggi is in his 80s now. He still gives interviews. He still contests the narrative. He still insists that the penalties against Juventus were disproportionate and politically motivated, that the investigation was a weapon, not a reckoning. Maybe he's right that others escaped scrutiny they deserved. Maybe the full picture of Calciopoli has still not been fully seen. But the phone calls exist. The transcripts are real. A man who was supposed to be allocating referees fairly was taking calls from the most powerful director in Italian football. And those calls shaped which officials walked out onto the pitch in front of millions of people. Whatever the full truth of Calciopoli turns out to be, that much is not in dispute. The most successful club in Italian football history won its titles with a hand on the scales. And when the scales were finally examined, the hand was unmistakable. Italian football has spent nearly 2 decades trying to decide what that means. It hasn't finished yet.